Welcome. We're so glad to have you all with us this afternoon, evening. Thank you for joining. My name is Kelsa Trum. I'm the Associate Director of Programs at New Inc. New Inc. is a cultural incubator that is a program of the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York City. This program is part of our New Drink series in partnership with Data and Society, who we're so excited to be syncing up with today. This is a monthly, or in this season of our lives, a weekly event series that explores conversations addressing critical topics and emergent ideas that are really at the heart of what our community is working on. The sessions are our way to spotlight the interdisciplinary community of artists, designers, technologists, researchers, social change advocates that live in and around New Inc. And I will turn over to Rigo to welcome on behalf of Data and Society.
Thank you, Kelsa, and it's really wonderful to be here with everyone. Data and Society, in case you haven't heard of us, is an independent research institute studying the social implications of data and automation. We produce original research and regularly convene multidisciplinary thinkers to challenge the power and purpose of tech in society. And I'll post that and the link to our site on the website. Really happy to be here and in collaboration with our partners at New Inc.
Thank you, Rigo. So just a few quick notes to keep us organized in this virtual space where we are together today, and so many days lately. For the time being, please keep your mics muted while we hear from our speakers. And as we get into the conversation portion of our time together, we will absolutely invite you to unmute and speak if you are comfortable. If not, you can pop things in the chat and we'll make sure that we get them answered. We encourage you all in true New Inc. fashion to add your pronouns to your name. You can do that by hovering over your Zoom picture and tapping the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and clicking rename. This program is being recorded and will be later posted to New Inc.'s YouTube channel. So you're welcome to be on camera, off camera, go between, do what feels best for you. You'll also be able to view the program later or send it to any friends or colleagues or peers of yours who couldn't make it today. This program also, as Maddie popped in our chat, has closed captioning. If you'd like to enable closed captioning, just tap that CC button in the lower right corner of your Zoom window. And though we're together in virtual space today, I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining you from the unceded land of the Lenape people. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying respect to the Lenape people and elders and ancestors, past, present, and future. I invite all of you to drop in the chat the ancestral lands that you are joining from as a way of introducing yourself and warming up our space. Maddie's going to drop in a link where you can see what ancestral lands you might be inhabiting if you don't already know. In New Inc., in our kind of community, in our extended events, we love having an active and vibrant and lively chat. So please feel free to amplify the voices of our speakers, riff on themes, ask questions, post links, show your enthusiasm and excitement, and keep the energy high in the chat. I also just want to say a couple of quick words about New Inc. for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We are a membership program. We operate on a year-long basis, so people join us for 12 months, September through August. And exciting news, we're in the midst of our open call, as you can see in my very bright background photo. Our open call is live through April 20th, and we'll drop information in the chat if you're curious about learning more about whether or not New Ink is a place for you to continue to dig into some of these themes and adjacent themes to advance your practice and to meet a community of really spirited and animated and supportive creators. I would love to introduce to you all Ari Melenciano, who is an alum of our program, currently a mentor in our program, and one of those people who I so admire for her ability to, with unbelievable grace and elegance, do so much in our creative and design and the sort of community in and around the arts and tech and creative tech in New York and beyond. Ari is a designer, creative technologist, a researcher. Her passions lie in the relationships between design and sentient experiences. She is a creative technologist at Google's Creative Lab. She teaches and is a research fellow at NYU's ITP graduate program. She founded Afrotectopia, a social institution fostering interdisciplinary innovation at the intersections of art, design, technology, Black culture, and activism. This particular project is a huge part of what motivated us to run this program today. And in discussions with Adrian Rigo, and a colleague of mine, Emma Osore, around what it means to exist in a collective environment online, and the fact that we're now a year into this madness of experiencing joint efforts and collective energy and shared ethos in digital life is something that I think is not easy, and Ari's leadership and sort of stewardship in that field is something for, I think, all of us. We have so much to learn from her. And so really, really thrilled to have Ari with us today. And Audrey, I'll hand over to you to introduce Tricia.
Hi. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see your faces. I miss everyone so much. Hi, Tricia. I'm going to briefly introduce you. I could say so much about you. I've known you for a long time now, but I'm going to keep it short because I want to get into this conversation. Tricia Wang is a global tech ethnographer, sociologist, co-founder of Sudden Compass, affiliate at Data and Society, and someone who thinks incredibly deeply and intentionally about building community and the ways that organizations and communities can use technology to serve people. I've just learned so much about you, about how to build community, not only on the dance floor, but in your work. And I'm really, really looking forward to hearing you reflect with Ari today about community and collectivism online. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over.
Great. Thank you all for hosting this. This is exciting that two titans of New York City's art and design and tech life have come together every year. So it's an honor to be here, and it's a bigger honor to actually get to interview Ari. So I would love to spend today, Ari, talking a bit about just like what you've been doing over the last few years, to use this as a moment to reflect on what you've been doing, what you've learned, if there's like advice you have for what it means now, for other people who are possibly interested in community design or who are in communities. And I think it'd be cool to also hear from you for, where you're going now, like kind of what's next. But for everyone who, I remember when we first met, I was like, we should start really with Afrotectopia, because I remember like, I don't know how many people, please raise your hands if, or, use the little reaction button if you were at the first Afrotectopia, but that was like my first moment where I know we met, and I remember walking into that space, and I was with Latoya Peterson, who is another amazing technologist and, co-founder of Glow Up Games Lab. And I remember we walked in and we were just like, what is this? This is like, usually like I've been to ITP a lot of times, I've taught there, been a fellow there, but I was like, what is this like amazingness? And I think it really captured a lot. It was like such an amazing emotion or feeling, because I've been to IPT many times, but never had I been there where it was filled with so many Black people and Black artists and Black technologists and Black educators. It wasn't like it was only Black people, that was the dominant group. And so I'm curious, like, what that was like my first experience meeting. I remember you're like weaving in and out of crowd, and like there was amazing speakers like Rashida Richardson and Vincent Sunderland were speaking, and then there was like theater and arts. What made you bring together that first initial space, you know, where it was like unlike any other, where it wasn't just technology or wasn't just about organizing, like it was a smashing of so many groups. Like you go through one room and be like talking about, you know, facial recognition and discrimination. Another room would be like a theater art performance. Like what was that all about? Where did that come from for you?
Yeah, that was, I mean, I remember meeting you too. I remember just like you had just a exciting energy. So I'm really glad that we remained in touch, and you've been such a big supporter from since then. But yeah, that was created because it was always the opposite in my experience, and being on the IT floor was never that. So that was like just one of my favorite times on the IT floor, of seeing so many different people that look like me on the floor. And so that was created because I was a student, and coming from a hometown that's predominantly Black, it was very jarring to be in a space that was so not diverse racially. And I was thinking about how in learning technology and just being excited about all the really amazing things that you can do with it, and how it also doesn't have to be this very difficult thing. Like it can be something that's, it doesn't have to have this extreme learning curve that we assume it to have. So in getting to know technology and seeing all the power that you can have in creating things artistically, but also the way that it can impact people and their livelihood, it was really important for me to make sure that Black people were in the conversation. And it just wasn't something that I got to see much in the tech world in general. It's not exclusive to the NYU at all. So that's where that came from, of really, I needed a community. I needed people to be able to talk about these things with race and tech, and just expressing your Blackness through new media. And I needed mentors, and I wanted also to save people time, all the time that I felt like I didn't waste any time, but there would have been so many more possibilities had I saw that I could do this kind of stuff if I was younger and saw that Black people were in this space. I just wanted to be able to make sure that anyone that was coming into the space after me, that they got to get a jump start earlier on and saw people that looked like them.
Well, one of the things that really has always struck me about Afrotectopia is like being, being there from day one, kind of watching the first at least gathering, was that like, it's very rare to be in a space where you're not just consuming Black culture without thinking about it, and you're actually around cultural producers at all levels of the stack. So it's like, I think like oftentimes, it's really uncomfortable to be in spaces as a non-Black person, to be where like clearly there's Black culture being consumed here, whether it's like at concerts or, in other spaces you hear like where it's music or it's like Black thought or theory, but you don't see Black people in the room, and you don't see them being centered, or they're not the dominant group, and I think it's really important that like there are spaces where you get to actually see that creation happening at different levels. Because I don't know, I'm curious, were you explicit about the programming of this community to be like, well, it's not just like, Black artists, but it's also Black coders, and it's not just Black coders, it's also engineers, hardware and software, and it's also artists, it's also theater people, it's also rappers. It was like all kinds of cultural making was happening at all levels of the stack. And I'm curious, like, how intentional was that? Or is it just like, because you already see the world that way? Like what was going into your thinking when you were curating that space, that initial Afrotectopia?
Yeah, it was definitely about like being in the tech space. When you go to tech events, that's very tech centric. Like that's purely what you're going for, is you're going to an engineering conference and everyone's talking about what libraries, So this one, I didn't want it to be that exclusive. I wanted to be tech relatively at the center of what we were doing, but I wanted it to be a space that's very welcoming of a variety of different kind of people, because it was really important that we're entering this space understanding that we are challenging very difficult systems, and we need to do that in a very interdisciplinary kind of form. So I don't think I wasn't as intentional. Like it was really exciting to see all the variety of different kind of people that were there. I didn't specifically like reach out to that wide variety of people, but I think it's something that was also just subconscious of, these were the titles of the panels that we had, and these are the different presenters that we had, and they were coming from a lot of different spaces. So we had people like Rashida Richardson, who was talking about policy, and also brought in Vincent Sutherland, who's at the NYU Law School. And then we had people like American artists and Rasu talking, and DJ Spooky talking about music. And we just had a lot of different kind of people that were coming in and sharing their work, and their communities were also coming in. So I think it's really just also the curation of who are you giving a platform to, and that kind of pulls in those different communities.
Yeah, so for those who weren't who aren't as familiar with Afrotechtopia, could you describe to people in your words what is Afrotechtopia for you? You know, what kind of space is it?
Afrotechtopia began as a new media art technology Black culture festival, where we're bringing together a variety of different people in the form of a festival, where it's kind of like an intellectual festival. Like, it's a celebration of the possibilities at the intersections of art and design and technology and Black culture. And we're learning and having a great time doing it. For me, I'm an educator, so it's always about thinking about a classroom outside of even just a classroom space, but how to create that kind of space that inspires people to bring themselves into the space and learn and use the tools that are provided. So I think generally that's where it started, of like this festival. And for me, it was filling in that void that I had in my career and going into grad school, and just not having a community of people that were thinking very consciously about race and society in tandem with tech. And what it's grown into is, I don't even know what word I could use right now to describe it, because it's also changing. It's growing constantly. And what it's been able to do in the past, we started in 2018. That was the first festival. And since then, it's become a summer camp for New York City's public school students. It's been a think tank. It's always a think tank in the festivals, but also it's been a think tank outside of that. And it's been an alternative adult school. So we've had programming where adults can come in and learn about the possibilities of art and tech. So it's really just a space where we're thinking very critically about how can we create through a variety of different lenses.
Yeah, and when you say, I'm curious, like sometimes you change the pronouns between like, you know, we are doing this versus like when you said you first started Afrotechtopia, you're like, it was I who was trying to fill this void that you experienced in your career. So, you know, what is the difference between the I and the we, and like, how do you think about it as an artist? Like, is the we the artistic expression of what you're doing? Like, how do you think about that? Like, who is the we?
I do that all the time. And I don't know in what instance I did it that I meant it. I think that's also just like, when you're building an institution, you have to refer to it as we. Like, I can't say I, and I also don't want to take all the credit, because though I design the space, it's so much of a conversation. Like, I'm really creating this space and this container, but people are turning it into something that I could have never imagined. So that's where the we.
Can you give us an example of like how it became something where someone took it into a way that you didn't imagine?
Yeah, like and even in the first one, and I think it's also just like your approach. For me, I'm a very introverted person. I don't really like to be on a stage, and I really enjoy just being a fly on the wall and watching people just do whatever they do. And so I saw that a lot in the first festival, even of we spread out into think tanks, and then people came back and they shared their work. And just the way that people presented their work, of like, they organized themselves and how they were going to share what each group talked about. And some people just came in and they took on the task of being the documenter, and so they took pictures of all the notes. And so I think moments like that just make me really excited, when people feel like they have the agency and permission to kind of just like do what you want with that space and make it conducive.
How you know, before we go into like when I start, I really want to get to like their lessons learned, but I have a few questions first about like what it means to be an artist designing for that space. Because like oftentimes, you know, I think artists are like thinking about the difference between how much of it is their vision and having that control, versus when you're designing a community, what does it mean for you to say, as an artist, I'm designing a community? And then you let go of the I and going into the we, and like letting people, like, I think it was in an interview I read where you're like, I designed the container and then other people fill it. How do you manage that as an artist, where you want to maintain the vision, control of that, and then like giving that up to the community to let them do what they want to do and turn it into something you couldn't have expected.
Yeah, I think that goes into the lessons learned.
Let's go into it.
You can't have everything, and I'm learning that a lot of like that. It's been very interesting. It was very seamless for years, and then it started to hit a point where it's like, I think it's also just like you have to really learn about yourself and be assertive and unapologetic and like what you are creating. And I think when you don't create those kind of boundaries, you're confused and other people are confused. So for me, it's been really interesting. I never even realized that I was approaching Afrotopia as a sort of art practice. For me, it's just I have this problem and I want to create a solution around it. But the way that I generally do anything, it's through this sort of art form. And so when I started to realize, oh, Afrotopia is basically this art practice of mine where I'm thinking about people very intentionally of how can I make something that makes people feel good and feel enlightened and excited. And every part of that is really in art, like even just like the badges that you wear, and like having like the second festival, you wrote your own name on a badge. So it's not like someone's like determining who you are, but you can kind of, this is a way for you to present yourself to other people. So it's a lot of little decisions like that. But I think it's a lot of push and pull when you're starting to create a space for people to bring themselves into, because you'll have your own ideals as an artist and you want it to be a certain kind of environment. But it's also a lot of learning, because once you let something go, then people kind of, they can do something very differently with what you expected. And sometimes it can be really good and sometimes it can be not so great. So I don't really know how to answer that question directly. I just know it's been, it's just a continuous journey as far as learning and balancing that.
I want to dig a little deeper into what you're saying about like the badges as an example, because like I really want people to hear like what does it mean to bring an artistic and a design approach to community building. So what were you saying there about like letting people write their names, or what was that as an example?
So at the second one, the second and last one, we've only had two so far. That one, I just like sometimes I just like go a little overboard and just like do too many arts and crafts stuff with these projects. Like with Afrotopia, I want to do every little thing. So I created all these like little badges with a bunch of multicolored background, and then had a white part on it where people could write their name. And for me, I wanted people to write their name because this is a way for you to express yourself. Like this is who you are. Your handwriting is also who you are, and the little doodles that you do around your name is who you are, as opposed to kind of like giving people this blank slate of, or blank, just like a personalist, I don't know, something without a personality with your name. So I think just any moment where I can allow people to have some sort of expression and agency, it's really exciting for me in a way that's, conducive to the space. And that's what the frame for the second festival was of. The first festival, it transitioned so much in that the first one was in a general kind of community form, a conference-ish kind of form where you have panelists and everyone's kind of listening to them. But for me, since that first one, I had gone to so many panels and spoken on so many different panels where I really didn't enjoy being on stage talking or watching someone talking, because you only get to hear their perspective, and so much is brought up when you have other people that stand up and ask questions. So the second festival was more about how can we get as many voices as possible into this space? And so like even from the badges to just creating sort of workshop environments or ways for people to get engaged and talk to each other.
I just love that example. And the reason why I wanted to like have you explain that to people is I think that is a great example of like what it means to bring in a design lens or to community design, is that there is intentionality. And there's that every single act, like to me, I have like a much broader definition of design. I think, you probably would maybe agree with me, or if not, tell me, but it's like design to me is like at the most simplest definition is about intentionality. Mm-hmm. And like when you design is about making decisions. So really like anything can be, anything can be design, like life is design. To me, data is design. Like there's no such thing as raw data. All data is design because someone had to make a decision to collect that as a variable. And when you don't approach it with intentionality, especially in complex systems, and when there's complex history, and there's, oppression and all that stuff on top of it, you can really end up, screwing with people's lives and like making a lot of decisions that you're not aware of your bias. Not that you can get rid of bias, you're not aware of how that plays out. So I'm really interested in how you as a as a designer are bringing that into community design, and like, what are other examples where you're bringing that intentionality of how you bring people together to showcase, what I think, when we were talking, you used the phrase a lot is a Black brilliance, but is it like, how do you intentionally bring people together? Is it like only Black people, or like, when is it not Black people, where it's more pluralistic? Like, and I would love to talk, have people hear about what you've done also with Afrotectopia, like offshoots of it, where you have also used other spaces to design. Like, I would love to hear about Fractal, Fractal FET, and also the Imagineer Fellowship. So if we can go into that as examples of how you intentionally design other spaces, because they're not exactly like Afrotectopia, they're totally different. And like you said, even Afrotectopia is not the same every year. But tell us about these other spaces where you brought an intentional design mindset to those other instantiations of your art practice.
Yeah, even with so a lot of different questions. One question was like when is it Black only and when is it not Black only? And one thing I'm even just noticing now and reflecting is it's generally Black only when it's about, and it generally has been Black only when it's about skill sharing. So it's specifically about teaching and creating a space where people generally just haven't had access to that kind of space. And generally it's either free or extremely low cost. Like it's always about making sure it's as accessible as possible. So with the festival, that's always been open to whoever wants to come, because it's very much about creating the stage for Black brilliance. And in that stage, we want it to be something that as many people can have access to from all different backgrounds, can learn from, because it's really about centering Black voices and approaching Afrocentric design in a way that a lot of people can build off of and learn from. Other ways that I've thought about this kind of like centering of Black brilliance and using that as kind of like a pedestal in teaching is even with the summer camp. In our first summer camp with the New York City Public School high school and middle school students, every day I started off the class talking about a different Black or African pioneer. And we learned about their work and their history. And then we went into an emerging technology where we could replicate their work, but in today's form, in some way we can imagine it with emerging, what we had tools with today. So started off with people like Boris Kingeles Iselek, who's doing these kind of like speculative designs in Africa, these like new worlds, or the Black arts movement, or W.B. Du Bois, and data visualization. So it's always about showing them that these are people that have done this for so long, and now we have really exciting tools that we can use, and what would you do in the same vein as them? Or with the Imaginarium, that one was really about creating an environment where, for one, even starting off that Imaginarium fellowship, it was introducing them to the philosophies that I've used in building Afrotectopia. So one being that, and in the beginning of the fellowship, so they're coming from this kind of standpoint, and one being that technology is merely an extension of sentient capability. It's what the whole world and planet and galaxy, everything uses a form of technology to better its circumstance. So it's getting away from kind of thinking about technology in this like digital traditional syntax kind of form.
I think like what's interesting about what you're saying is that I think what's new for a lot of people is that there's such thing as Black technology. Like we don't think of the internet, we think of the internet as like a place that was created, I think, in dominant culture by white males. And I think like, even though Black culture is what makes the internet possible and rich, and there's so many people who profit off of it, and that profit doesn't go back to Black communities or creators, like for example, platforms like YouTube, where they don't even protect the people who are making these spaces rich. Like what you have done is created a space where you celebrate, like even if it's, whether it's only Black people sometimes, or when it's more pluralistic, it's still actually just saying like, first of all, like baseline, like period, you have to acknowledge that we're acknowledging there is Black technology and there is Black design. I don't know, this is a book like I have on my desk. I was thinking through like as inspiration. You all know, oh, I can't see it with my screen, but Andre Block's Distributed Blackness. And I love that book. It's like really not wanting to see it while it blends in, kind of. Okay, so right here, there we go. I love this book. I love his work because it reminds me of like, you are living out what he's studying, but you're spatializing what he's studying, which is he's saying like, Black technology is a thing and we need to acknowledge it, and we need to stop pretending like it doesn't exist, or that it is actually fueling, much of what makes the environment, rich, but also we need to like protect it, at the same time. So I'm curious, like, in this moment of what has happened in terms of community design when so much of it now has moved online, with COVID and with the pandemic. Our mental concepts of spaces have collapsed. First space being home, second space usually being work, and third space being the public, where you would go out and like meet different people, like bars or libraries or parks. Like, we're all now in one place. Like, where I'm standing right now at my desk is where I am at home. Also, it is my work, and it is also where I chill and like get to do things like this that you would have usually been out doing. What has shifted what you have seen for like being a community, like designing communities in a time of where all spaces have collapsed, what I'm calling spatial collapse? That's something I've been studying, and I'm curious from your perspective, what are you seeing for how communities connect in this time? Like, is it more difficult? Is it easier? Like, what's changed?
Yeah, I think it's changed in different directions, both great and probably creates more challenges. Great in that even with like the Imagineer Fellowship, like that was a really exciting time, just putting it out into the world and seeing the response to it. And one thing that I did that was pretty strategic in just getting to know who is looking at Aftertopia and like what do they want from it is having a conversation with the vast majority of the people that simply applied to the Imagineer Fellowship. So I like Monday through Friday, 1 week, I was having conversations with 100 different people every hour, every 30 minutes, it was a different person, and they were from all over the world. And that was really nice to just, for when we're entering each other's homes on Zoom, and I just get to hear about their life and what are the things that are inspiring them and why do they want to be involved in a space like Aftertopia. And that was really helpful. It was like basically a masterclass in understanding what people want and what they're searching for. And that then inspired the Imaginarium, where I had the Imagineer Fellowship, and that was strictly for a few people and funding them in their work. But the Imaginarium was an offshoot of that, of a lot of people really just wanted a space to come together with other Black people and talk about these issues, because they just didn't have it. They had no other space. They were either the only student in their predominantly white institution, or they're just in a space where people generally aren't thinking about the kind of topics that we're talking about. So being able to provide that sort of space was really exciting. And then we had the Imagineer Fellowship, and I think with this collapse of different spaces, that was probably that was definitely the most intimate environment that Aftertopia has ever been able to cultivate, where it was with 10 different creators, and we gathered every week for every Sunday, all Sunday. We would be on Zoom all day. We would bring in our lives into this space. We would talk about things that we're thinking about.
How many hours are we talking all day Sunday? Like, what do you mean?
10 to like maybe nine-ish to like 4, around 9.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so
okay.
But it was really nice. We got to know each other so well, and like there was just a really strong bond between all of them, and they were building really exciting projects, and it still wasn't even enough time with all that we wanted to do. We still wanted more time. So yeah, I think those have been the positive sides of we're in the comfort of our own home, and we're really engaging very intimately with each other. I think the harder sides, like that was easier because that's a curated group of people. It's very small, and we all are getting to know each other consistently. I think it becomes a lot harder. Fractal Fete was a huge feat within itself, because that is bringing hundreds, literally hundreds of people together. We're together every single evening for an entire month. And it's anyone that wants to come and identifies as Black or Pan-African. So I think when you have that kind of space, and everyone is kind of just like free to do whatever they want in this space. I mean, Zoom, you're able to chat, you're able to talk, like show your camera, all of these things. I think that can become a little difficult, because it's not just this one-off event where people are entering and getting to know each other immediately. It's more of people are actually building relationships with each other. And when you're building relationships, sometimes you can have conflict. And what happens in conflict with hundreds of people in a Zoom room, and you're meeting back to back to back, and we're in the resolution. So I think it's really a matter of the format of like how small or how big the group is, and the consistency. And
So you're saying that Imagineer was small, like 10
very
people,
small. Yeah.
long, intimate, and then Fractal Fet was like hundreds
Yeah, Imagineer was
at a time.
Yeah, 10 people, but over the span of 6 months. So we're meeting every week. Whereas Fractal Fet was hundreds of people back to back every night. So these are very, very different. And I think you'll just have challenges in either space, but yeah, they pose different.
Is there something that building online that's like actually, I mean, would Imagineer fellowships have been possible if it were not for COVID or without, like, was that something that came pre-COVID? Like you had this idea and it just so happened to be in COVID you were doing it? Like what
Yeah,
was
it wouldn't have been, it would not have been international if it wasn't for COVID.
Oh, so that change, you changed your program because of that?
Well, I realized that I was able to bring in other people because of that. Because of that, people were generally just, the application, I think I probably said it's open to anyone in the whole world. And I'm in that mind frame because no one can gather. But if we had been able to gather, it would have been, specifically to New York City, and that's all that would have been able to come.
I think that's incredible that, like, as terrible as the pandemic has been, but it's also forced us, because of the spatial collapse, to imagine new ways to build communities. And like we're seeing in real time that you, being a community designer, even were limited by, like, just the only thing came to in person, but the pandemic enabled you to like think more expansively about bringing people together. One thing, I'm seeing some comments in the chat, and what I really love is this comment from Akila Sharp, who says that she's a member of the Afro-Techtopia community, and she says it's one of the most, and she also attended Fractal Fet, and it's one of the most expansive environments I've ever experienced as it pertains to Black brilliance, nerdery, artistry, spirituality without silos. And this reminds me, of like it's really important, I think, to acknowledge like so much of the work that we can do now as organizers is always built on prior work too. But it's very rare. I want to acknowledge it is so rare to find a space like this that you've built. It reminds me actually of the work that Barbara Smith has done. I don't know if there's any Barbara Smith fans out there. I'll paste the link when I'm not talking anymore, but she was the one who really brought together, made Black feminism a thing. And she started the Kitchen Table Press, and she was an organizer, but she also started a space for creative writing, where Black women and Black art authors weren't being published. She was like, well, we'll just start a press. She also did organizing around economic rights. And it was, her vision was very pluralistic. It was not just like, we will only, look at race, but we're going to look at race as it intersects with sexuality and economics. And there's a quote that she says about her work. There's, her book right here. I don't know if I can get it here. I'm gonna be like, it's called Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. And there's a quote in here that I was like, this literally could be like Ari's doppelganger, where she says, we were able to assert that it was important to build community, institutions, do research, publish and teach. And we did it with the spirit of joy and vitality. It did take a lot of courage, just like the book title says, is more than a notion to assert that Black women's lives were valuable. And I think what's incredible is that like I have not yet seen a space like yours, and that's why it's been like incredible to witness, is that it's not just one type of space. There is such a seamlessness between so many levels of systems and so many levels of the stack, that I think like it is because it is like only you being who you are, because you're also an artist and a technologist and an educator, that you've brought all this together. So I just want to acknowledge that. It's not even like a question for you, but more like, I think like there are people who have come before you, and I'm really excited that like you are this person of our generation, of this generation, to bring so many places together. So I'm curious, like what's evolved for you to be recognized as such, as someone like this. Like, what does it mean for you as an artist or as a leader to get more, to actually have attention? And like, does it change when people have expectations of what you're building? And what does it do to you as a person? Because like when you first did this, like no one was like talking about community design as a thing and trying to like interview you and have these kind of, retros. But what has that done for you, to your identity as an artist and as a community designer?
I think, I don't know. For me, I don't want to say it doesn't really matter. I think
c'est celui-là, c'est sur la franchise.
Can somebody mute, please, your mic?
Comme vous voulez, vous me dites.
I would say, yeah, I don't think it.
Mais ouais, enfin, si on remonte, voilà, ça va ressembler à quoi je te dis d'avance, ça va ressembler à tout ici.
Ruby,
Et,
Chu, can you mute? Can someone, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I think the recognition is great because more people are learning about the work. So more people have access to the space. It always makes me, I just had this call with someone, I think maybe a week ago, who works at Apple, is like a creative at Apple, and like introduces people to like these new kind of tech softwares on Apple devices. And we were just having a one-on-one, and she didn't know a role like creative technologist existed. And I was so excited for her because I'm like, oh, this is this beautiful world that you're about to enter. And I think for me, that's what gets me really excited is the people that are learning about this work for the first time, and they're learning about it through through a Black lens, and seeing like maybe this is their first time of learning creative technology, but through a whole bunch of really incredible Black technologists. And I think for one, that is very inviting. I know for me growing up, I never saw creative technologists in general, but I definitely never saw Black people doing this kind of work. And so if I had, these are kind of the kind of things that affect your subconscious. So when you don't see that, it's really hard to even imagine it. And I think for me, that's what's the most exciting, is just the fact that people are learning that this kind of world exists.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's power in that. And like, I know you're someone, you know, we've talked about like you're shy, you don't want to be on stage, but like, I think like what's going to be interesting watching you, I personally I'm excited to witness your journey as you continue, is like you stepping more and more, even more into more power and harnessing that power. Because I think so much of what we see, the role models that we have in this like tech space as people get more famous, is that they become, you know, like just more terrible human beings oftentimes. And you know, it's more about like power grabbing and power hoarding. And like, I've seen the opposite from you. But how do you ensure that you do that? How do you like, what kind of support, like what kind of support systems do you have in place to, or like, what kind of like, I don't know, what's your practice for being like a human being that is aware and in touch, so that your biases are checked, so that you constantly are sticking true to your values, you know?
Yeah, I think for one, like when it comes specifically to building community, I have like, you are an advisor, Akila is an advisor. I have like people that I really trust and look to like just guide me. And I know when I've been in times of really stressful times and trying to build community, that was my go-to, of going to these people and talking to them and making sure, am I acting properly in this situation? Like, how does this situation look like in general? Like, can you be honest with me? So I think for one, it's really important to have people that, you know, just pull you along and teach you. It's so much learning. And then the other part of it, I think, is there is just like this, for me in the past year, I don't know what motivated me so much to just like get a lot more into spirituality in ways that I haven't before. And I know you've sent me some of my favorite audio files from Ram Dass, and kind of like learning from people like that. And I love the Tao, and just reading even like Buddhist kind of texts. So I think also these things of leaning into this idea of the duality and understanding that nothing is purely good, nothing is purely bad. There's always going to be elements of both. And just learning about emotional intelligence, learning about yourself, and not judging yourself for feeling certain ways. I think it's for me, I think in trying to build an institution, I kind of also sometimes negate my own humanity, and sometimes I just need to feel things and like navigate that as I'm trying to build a space that's safe for everyone else. So it's really also being very specific with energy. And that's something that I was very focused on from the beginning with Afrotectopia, of when I first had the festival and I was looking for people to present at it, it was a phone call with every single person. And I just wanted to get to know them, because I'm protective of the people that I'm like, or that are around me. And I want to make sure that they're in spaces that are safe and you know, are with people that have good energy. So I think that's also what people feel. I've had conversations with people that are saying, you know, you just walk into the Afrotopia and you feel that energy. And I think it's people that are aligned.
I think though that like what you just said was so important. I want everyone to hear what you just said, which is like, you talk to everybody who joined the Afrotectopia community. And I think that's like a key that to me is like something that like communities don't just accidentally happen. I think like for someone walking in who's like new now from the outside might be like, oh my God, this is such a great community. It feels so seamless. It's so, like pluralistic, but also at the same time, centers Blackness. Like, how did that happen? That's so cool. But it wasn't by accident, it was by design. And I think that's what being community design, like designing communities is about, is that you have that intentionality and that you spoke to people and you knew what kind of vibe you wanted. And so I think that's like a really good lesson, is like that, community design is about designing vibes. Another one that you mentioned is like, you have a support system and like, you're not doing it alone. So from the outside, people might be like, oh, wow, that's like, Ari Melenciano, like she's doing her thing, but like, you're also saying like, look, I have a support system. And I think earlier you also said another lesson you learned was that to have boundaries, so like knowing where you begin and end. And I'm curious how you had mentioned, I don't want to gloss this over, but like, how does your interest in like Buddhism and Taoism and Ram Dass and this stuff, how does that help you establish like boundaries or knowing who you are? How has that, like, we're going to get a little personal here, but how has that been for you? What's that like inner journey been like?
It's hard to pinpoint. There are some things within the Tao where it says things like, it says people are when they're ruled by a good leader, they don't know that they have a leader. And that's something that's important to me I think that definitely was explored in the most recent programming of, this idea, like it's a balance between, you don't want to dominate and like make your presence very known. You really want people to feel like they are guiding the experience themselves. And I think that, that's, and just general Tao kind of philosophies of, there's so many, it's hard to kind of like translate the philosophy into like a community design idea.
I think you live it. Maybe that's also why it's hard to put into words, but as someone who's watched you do it, like you are living it because you found a way to create a pluralistic community while also centering Black brilliance. Like, I think that's really different. And like what, for Buddhism and Taoism, it's like the heart of suffering is actually binary thinking, of dualism, of saying this is good, this is bad, which is like the heart of like Western thinking, of colonialism also. It's like, this is worthy, this is not worthy, this is, valued, this is not valued. And that's also the heart of capitalism. And that's fine. I'm not saying we should like destroy the way capitalism is. That's a whole other conversation. But like what you have done is you've negotiated that as an artist. I feel like you've done an incredible job, and we get to watch you in real time negotiate that, of like, how do you not fall into dualistic thinking? And like, sometimes I think like, and like, so we see that like you've created spaces where sometimes it is Black only, and it is very intentional though, but you've also created spaces where it's more open, also with a different kind of design rules. And then you have Afrotectopia. So I think like we're watching you as an artist in real time, working out that duality, and how do you avoid it, but also how do you navigate a world that is dualistic, where, because like race is like, there's identity, but race is also something that is ascribed to people. You don't get to choose to be seen in this certain way by the system. The system, there's history that ascribes that, there's data systems that ascribe that. They're out of your power, but also how do you celebrate your identity at the same time without getting lost in that imposed duality of like, what's white, what's Black, what's Asian, what's not, which is, it's artificial, but identity and joy isn't.
Yeah, and I think like the balance of spirituality and just like activist sort of work, it's also this, like our understandings of radicalism, which in one of the books that I'll share of, it talks about like being a true revolutionary and being someone that's radical. It's not so much of, I want to burn everything down and that's it, and now I'll be satisfied. It's more of, you have new visions and you have new worlds that you want to create, but you're also very reflective of your role in society. What you like, there's a lot of turmoil and oppression and all those things that exist, very oppressive systems, but we all are playing a role in it, and it's being very gentle with each other and understanding that just being welcoming and I think just the gentleness with each other is really important.
Who talks about Black radicalness?
This was Andrew.
Linda Andrews.
Yeah.
Is that the book that you shared to me? I'm going to put Ari's link in here for the book that she shared with me. And we're going to jump to, I love that you brought up that last point. So we have a question here from Miriam, which is, it segues from what we were just talking about, which is that, what does accountability look like in community design for you?
Accountability in community design. Definitely still learning. What does that look like? It's a hard question to answer. Accountability in community design. It looks like I think it's something that's really difficult to navigate, and it depends on who's taking accountability. I think when it comes, and that's also something that I've learned is like with boundaries, you have to make sure that the space is very clear of what the boundaries are within that space. And for me, in building Aftertopia, it's been very much of vibes and like it's really about people are entering this space and they feel that energy. And I think when we're shifting to online and you have new people come in and old people too, it's hard to feel that energy. And I've relied so long on energy being the conduct. And I think that was such a big mistake when you're building in like with numbers, with strangers and people that just don't know you. So I think for one,
what do you mean? What do you mean that was a mistake? You said you relied on energy.
I relied on energy and good faith, just assume that, everyone understands what kind of space this is. And we know how to, everyone knows how to, talk to each other and these kind of things. People have different ways of navigating through the world. And I think I just wasn't really thinking about that. I just really assumed the best. So when you have things like written out conducts and written out community agreements and these sorts of things, it's very clearly displaying this is how the community is designed and this is how we engage in this kind of space. So I think before we even get to accountability, there's a work that needs to be done to make sure that you have as little of those kind of situations as possible. Then when it comes to accountability, I think it's something it also, again, it depends on who is taking accountability. I think for me as a leader, when I'm finding myself making mistakes, I think it is like going to my advisors as I did and checking in with them and getting a consensus as far as how I'm doing. And then when it comes to the community, it's being very clear when I feel like I have done something wrong and expressing that and sharing that. And also understanding that people inside the space, you are not going to agree with like the mistakes that were made. And sometimes people will identify a mistake happening and other people won't see that mistake happening. So it's really complicated. I don't know how to answer that question in a clear way.
Well, I like what you were saying is that even before accountability, you actually have to outline expectations. Otherwise, it's like, what are we accountable to? We can't just make that stuff up. So I think that's really important. Stephanie has a question here, Stephanie Pereira from New Ink. Hey, Stephanie, her question is, as you scale your community and build your institution, how will you continue to center your humanity and the intersectional perspectives of all your people? How will humans just, not get lost in the institution?
Yeah, centering my humanity is something I'm learning how to do in like the past couple months.
What do you mean?
Well, for me, when in designing Aftertopia, it's been so much of it's not about me and it's really about creating this kind of space. So I think when I go into that mode, I'm not thinking about like what's best for me. I'll do anything to make that space. And that can be, that's what's made it so exhausting. And that's what's honestly made me sometimes not want to do this anymore. I just leave building this feeling depleted and exhausted. And I think it just wasn't enough of a balance. So I think I'm learning a lot more now. There's just like, it's really difficult when you're a human being and you are trying to create an institution, because you can no longer be a human being. You're becoming this institution to, create this kind of space. So
becoming the we.
Yeah, becoming the we. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's just something that's been difficult to navigate, but I'm learning more and more how to do that. And then when it comes to scaling, I'm actually, scaling is an interesting word, because I think I'm really not trying to, and it's something I've inherently felt, like intuitively felt, that I don't really want this to be something that's big, because it's kind of like a recipe. Once you like mass produce that, the flavors just change, and I don't want it to be something like that with Afrotopia. But I don't want it to be this huge event where you have thousands of people and then the experience is entirely different. But I also just, as a person, I generally enjoy smaller, intimate settings. I like to get to know people, and it not be like such a big event. And though I want this to be a space that's accessible to as many people as possible, I'm learning that I also want this to be a space that's very intentional about community and trust and creating with a small group of people. And so that kind of reverses this idea of scaling community and building, but it's more about just kind of diving a little deeper in with the smaller group of people that you have, and hopefully the work that's being developed in that space is impacting more and more people.
Well, you know, I think like if there's anything that's clear from us seeing your history since 2018 is that you are not, I mean, you're not at the place where you're like, this is the one thing that Afrotectopia is going to do, and it's going to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. Because it's like you've had 2 years of the festival in person, but those 2 years, like you said, weren't even the same. Like you're still figuring it out in process. So I think, I mean, it seems like it makes sense that you're like, well, maybe scaling is not the thing, but I do think that energy does scale, and you don't, and that's like the thing that I think is beautiful about what you've done is that energy is infectious, you know, like you can curate as small or large as the group as you want, but those people will walk away changed forever, and they're going to bring that energy to other people's lives. And so I think like we have to think about scaling in a different way, and not in this like, you know, very capitalistic way where it's like, what is your product and what is your solution and what are you going to do to make that widget over and over again? But it's like, hello, think about energy and think about how that actually spreads. And I think, you know, about the energy of leaders before us and the leaders that you've looked up to. So, you know, this is something we've talked a lot about is like, you know, you're reading about these artists, these leaders who have passed away, but their energy is here, and that's scaling. You know, that's like we are building off of their language and their legacy. So yeah, I love thinking about scaling in that way. And I'm excited to see what comes out of your work and bringing together more intimate spaces as you explore that. We have a question from Sarah where she talks about, you know, she's asking, and I want to acknowledge Sophie's answer before I forgot to, she just had a comment, but she was about accountability, where she says, talking about how conflict has been addressed may be a way to flesh out accountability. So that is a great point, is to not avoid conflict, which is often what happens in, you know, Karen dominant cultures. So not happening here. So with Sarah's question, it's, how do you balance your position as a leader of your communities with co-creation and community creation decision-making, while also maintaining the integrity of the offering, AKA not leading to a free-for-all if lots of people can have input, but not also wanting to create like this like top-down infrastructure structure?
I think that's a great question. And I think it's a lot of learning. I think there are a lot of theories. Like for me, I'm immersed in theory, and I'm understanding that sometimes theory is not practical. So I think we, as I've talked about for years, I really want Afrotopia to be as de-hierarchical as possible. But there is a lot of complexity in that. And you need people that are creating these boundaries, and you need structure, and even reading about things like monasteries and histories of them, or even communes, and kind of like people crave rules, and you need to have that because that allows people to have a certain way of engaging and navigating through that space. So I think sometimes theoretically we would love to create this space that's kind of like completely horizontally structured and everyone has a say. But I think when you are creating, especially with numbers, that's not really something that's safe. And I wouldn't say it's really possible to do effectively. So I think it's kind of just like finding that balance. And yeah, it just requires a lot of learning.
Yeah, and I know that's something that you're always trying to balance out. And I think like, you know, as someone who is a designer, I work with a lot of designers. I think like designers flourish best, including myself, when there is structure and when there are when there's guidance. You know, if you had to, if you know, New Ink and Data and Society came to us, they're like, do whatever you want. And we'd be like, but what do you mean? Like have a conversation? Should we dance together? Should it, like, you know, but there was structure to this. It was like, this is an hour, we're going to talk and blah, blah. So I think like always having some kind of containers is really important. And you, I have seen you like, you know, figure out your process as a leader of like, how much do you define that container so that people know and have the greatest freedom to move, and not seeing as like you're being top down, but seeing it as like, that's actually liberation. You know, you give people some space to play, because play needs rules, you know, play cannot just be, you know, I think we had this like concept of play is like it's open-ended. So I really think it's important what you're doing. We have a question here from Andrew who says, as an educator, what kinds of things do you think you wish your students would see, hear, or read or experience before leaving school?
Well, K through 12, I mean, or university, I think K through 12, there's so much. I wish there was a class on emotional intelligence in K through 12, because I think that's just so important, and adults don't even know. I mean, I talk about this with friends of even the movie Malcolm and Marie, like that's a lack of a lot of emotional intelligence. And I know it's very triggering for a lot of people because we're all kind of like navigating spaces very similar to that. So I think, but emotional intelligence comes in every part of your life and every part of your life from K through your adulthood. So I think that would be great. But I think in the university space, I wish students, I mean, there's so many things. I think for me, as I've mentioned, I'm generally a pretty introverted person. So I really didn't start having office hours until probably like my last year of grad school. Like I never met with my professors. And I think that's just, I don't know what to talk with them about. Like, I don't know how to ask for help. And sometimes it's not even about asking for help. It's just creating that kind of relationship and showing them that you care about the work that you're doing and you want to learn from them. So I think just having that kind of recognition that you need to kind of just push yourself out of your comfort zone and place yourself in conversation.
Well, and I think it's important, like that realization of realizing like your teachers serve you, you know, like when you're a teacher, you're at the service of your students. And like, oftentimes I think we forget in university environments, there's all this like, you know, like performance, but that at the end of the day, you're paying to be there, or you've been invited to be there, but regardless, it's like, you're serving me, you know, and I think that's important to bring into that space. I have to say, I want to add something I wish people would learn is nonviolent communication for all age groups. And if you're not a fan of nonviolent communication, I think it's so critical for community design and how people communicate. And I just popped in a link there. Well, I'm curious, like, what is the next phase of your work as a community designer? You know, if we think about phase one of Afrotectopia was very much about these kind of you know, about looking at who exists in this space, right? You were like, because you were saying you created it because you needed to identify people who were like you and to kind of create the space that you wanted. What is that next phase of Afrotectopia? Is it the same? Is it going to morph?
Yeah. Phase one was definitely about, I don't personally see people, and I know a lot of us don't get to see each other. So let's create an environment where we get to see each other. I think, and kind of like go big and just like have anyone that wants to come in this space come in. I think phase two is more about, okay, the community is clearly there. And you know, a lot of us clearly recognize each other. So I think that's been a successful phase. And now it's moving into, how can I directly invest and cultivate talent on a much more intimate scale and build smaller micro communities where the work that we're doing and outputting is reaching a lot more people, but we're kind of doing it in smaller environments and taking more time and moving a lot slower. So I think that for me it's really about just kind of getting a lot more intimate.
Well, as you move into that space of building more intimate gatherings, who are the people what's the kind of thinking? Are there books or authors or artists who are inspiring you to think about this intentional shift? Because again, you're a designer, so you're like intentionally shifting to this. Who are you going to be drawing upon, or who are you drawing upon already for that kind of inspiration? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think at least when it goes to like a past presenter, we had Victor Dibia, who I just think about his work all the time of him creating, using machine learning to create these African masks. And I think that's so beautiful, of using data and creating artifacts that don't exist. They don't exist. And he's just creating these sort of artificial artifacts, which is so important in thinking about the Black movement to the States and in our just a complete severance from our cultural history and our understanding of our culture. So Victor always excites me in using technology to create those possibilities. Ash Bacchus-Clark has been really exciting for me. She was basically the brain behind neurospeculative Afrofuturism. So really excited to continue building with her, and Mimi Unuoha, who does work on data and thinking about how the politics of data and what data is gathered and not gathered. Corday Jatafa Henry, who like every conversation I have with him, I'm leaving inspired of just so much passion as far as ways to blend art and tech together, but specifically through a cultural lens and an emotional lens. And then Jeremy Kamal, and thinking about entirely new worlds and visions, and creating actual landscapes that are in the framework of Black culture and using Black impactful leaders. And then Onyx, who I get like a brain dump from every few times a year, and I leave with my mind exploded of just the way that he's thinking about just like almost redesigning the human body through technology and just new forms of engagement. Onyx is just incredible.
What was the first name you mentioned about
Victor Dibia with machine learning?
Oh, got it. Okay, yes. I'm pasting all the links in here. So those are the artists who you're drawing from. Are there any other books that you're reading that we should know about for this new intentional phase 2 of your life?
Yeah. Well, these are books I've read in the past that have been very great guiding lights in building Aftertopia. One being Black Dada by Adam Pendleton, and it's the compilation of a bunch of different writers, from Leroy Jones to Adrian Piper, and just thinking about just kind of like moving away from status quo and envisioning new ways of operating through a Black lens. And Stokely Carmichael Speaks. Stokely Carmichael is like my favorite activist. I love everything that he creates. So Stokely Speaks was very transformative. Back to Black by Kehinde Andrews was
that's what you mentioned before about radical.
I mentioned that one. Yeah, that one was just an incredibly impactful. That one's really questioning the power of liberalism, calling liberalism basically the biggest criminality that could ever exist. And it goes deep, and it's very unapologetic, and all about love, of course, bell hooks, and then pedagogy of the oppressed, and being an educator and loving everything, the way Paulo Freire thinks about not treating people and students as containers, but kind of these vessels, and giving them the tools to realize their own better selves.
That is incredible. Well, I think with that, we all have a lot of homework to do so that we can, also get our learnings in and try and keep up and so that when you make that announcement for what that new space will look like, we can, kind of migrate ourselves there. I put into the chat ways that you can stay in touch with Ari's brain. There's her Instagram and newsletter and Twitter account. Ari, is there anything else you want to mention before I turn it back to our hosts?
I would just say thank you. It was so nice to be in conversation with you. It's always really nice. So thank you.
I know, it's like we're just talking like at night when I'm calling you on the phone. What's going on? All right. Well, thank you so much for this chat, and I hope you all have enjoyed it. It's so cool that New Ink and Data Society are hosting this.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you, Ari. I feel like the principles that you've shared, knowing or not, that I'm keep hearing repeat in my head, are slower, closer, more intimate. Really grateful for that. Dropping a little bit of info on New Ink and our open call in the chat for any who are interested, and we will post this recording soon. Thank you all so much for being here, and stay safe. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.